I was standing alone under the cold fluorescent lights of gate C-17 when I realized my husband hadn't just left me behind. He had erased me. My boarding pass wouldn't scan. My debit card kept declining. And when I finally checked my phone, there was a message from Daniel that made my stomach twist so sharply I had to grip the counter to stay upright. Relax. Babe, let's see if you can find your own way home this time. A second later, another alert flashed across my screen. Your account has been locked due to suspicious activity. That was the moment I understood this wasn't one of Daniel's careless jokes. Something had gone terribly wrong, and somehow I was right in the middle of it. Just 15 minutes earlier, I had been hurrying through Seattle-Tacoma International Airport, dragging my suitcase across the polished floor, trying not to fall behind Daniel and his family. They had rushed ahead, laughing about something I hadn't heard, their voices blending with the hum of rolling luggage and boarding announcements. I remember feeling slightly embarrassed, like I always did when they walked too fast and didn't bother to slow down for me. Daniel's mother, Margaret, had glanced back once with that tight smile she wore whenever she thought I was being inconvenient. "Keep up. Lauren," she had called out. "You don't want to miss the flight." At the time, I thought they were just eager to board early. That was normal for them. Everything was always a competition, even who got on the plane first. But now, standing at the gate with strangers staring and the airline agent frowning at my boarding pass, something didn't feel right. "Ma'am," the agent said gently, scanning the ticket again. A red light flashed on the screen. "This ticket has been canceled." The word canceled echoed in my head like a warning siren. "Canceled," I repeated, my voice sounding thin even to my own ears. "That's not possible. My husband has the group reservation." The agent typed quickly, her expression tightening just slightly. "Yes, ma'am." The cancellation request came from the original purchaser, Daniel. My chest tightened as I stepped aside, fingers trembling as I pulled out my phone. I typed his name and pressed call. Straight to voicemail. I tried again. Nothing. Then my screen lit up with a new message. "Relax. It's just a game." Before I could even process that, another message appeared, this time from his cousin Tyler. "They're taking bets on how long it takes you to panic." A string of laughing emojis followed. My cheeks burned as I looked around, suddenly aware of how exposed I felt standing there with strangers passing by, some glancing at me with quiet curiosity. I felt small, ridiculous, like the punchline to a joke I didn't understand. This wasn't the first time Daniel's family had pushed things too far. They called it humor, family bonding, harmless teasing. But standing there at that gate, I didn't feel included. I felt targeted. I forced myself to breathe slowly and walked toward the ticket counter, determined to fix the situation myself. If they wanted to laugh, fine. I would simply buy another ticket and meet them at the destination. I handed my debit card to the agent. She swiped it once, then again. Her expression shifted. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. "This card has been declined." A sharp chill ran through my body. "That's not possible," I whispered, trying to sound calm even though my pulse was racing. "Try it again." She did. Declined. My phone vibrated in my hand. I looked down and saw a message from my bank. "Your account has been temporarily locked due to suspicious activity." The noise of the airport faded into the background, replaced by a strange ringing in my ears. I stepped away from the counter and moved toward a row of empty seats near the window, my legs suddenly unsteady beneath me. Outside, snow drifted slowly across the runway, covering everything in quiet white. Inside, my world felt like it was collapsing just as silently. Daniel still wasn't answering. None of them were. With shaking fingers, I opened my email, searching for anything that could explain what was happening. My inbox refreshed, and a new message appeared at the very top. "Loan approval confirmation." I frowned, my heart pounding harder with every second. I didn't remember applying for any loan. Not recently. Not ever. I tapped the email and opened the attached document, my breath catching in my throat as the screen loaded. My name sat boldly across the top of the page. Lauren Hayes. Below it, a number appeared, large enough to destroy my credit, my future, my life if it was real. My hands trembled as I scrolled down slowly, forcing myself to keep reading. Then I saw the signature. At first glance, it looked exactly like mine. Same curves, same loops, same careless tilt at the end of my last name. But as I stared longer, something inside me turned cold, because I knew my handwriting. And this, wasn't it? That was the moment I stopped worrying about getting home and started wondering what Daniel had done to me. I kept staring at the signature until the letters blurred together, my breath coming in short, shallow bursts. My first instinct was to call Daniel again, to demand answers, to force him to explain what I was looking at. But when I tapped his name, the call didn't even ring. Straight to silence. Not voicemail, not busy, just nothing. That silence felt heavier than any cruel joke he had ever played before. I lowered the phone slowly, my fingers cold despite the crowded warmth of the terminal. Around me, travelers hurried past with coffee cups and rolling suitcases, completely unaware that my life had just shifted into something unrecognizable. I sat near a charging station, clutching my phone like it was the only thing anchoring me to reality. I forced myself to think clearly, step by step. Ticket canceled. Bank account locked. Loan opened in my name. None of that happened by accident. None of it happened in a moment of laughter. It required time, planning, intention. This wasn't a prank. This was preparation. I stood up and returned to the airline counter, swallowing the fear rising in my throat. Is there any way to reverse the cancellation? I asked quietly. I don't have access to my funds right now. The agent checked again, her expression soft but helpless. I'm sorry. Ma'am. The cancellation request came directly from the original purchaser, Daniel. Hearing his name spoken aloud felt like a physical blow. I walked away slowly, my legs unsteady, and sat at a small cafe table with nothing but a free cup of water in front of me. I reopened the loan document, scanning every line more carefully this time. That was when I noticed the approval date. 2 days before the trip. A chill crept through my chest. The trip itself might have been part of the plan. My phone buzzed suddenly, making me flinch so hard the plastic chair scraped loudly against the floor. An unknown number flashed across the screen. I stared at it for several seconds before answering. Hello, is this Lauren Hayes? A male voice asked. Calm and professional. Yes, this is Daniel Carter from Northwest Lending. I'm calling regarding your recent loan approval. My grip tightened around the phone. What loan? I whispered. The man paused briefly, then spoke in a measured tone. The loan issued under your name earlier this week. Payment obligations begin within the next few days. My stomach dropped as if the ground beneath me had vanished. This has to be a mistake, I said, my voice shaking despite my effort to sound steady. I'm afraid the documents are legally binding, he replied. Failure to meet the payment schedule will result in penalties. Penalties. The word echoed inside my skull long after the call ended. By the time the night bus left Seattle, I had made a decision I never thought I would make. I wasn't going home. Not to Daniel. Not to Tacoma. Not to the house that suddenly felt like a trap waiting to close around me. The bus rolled through the dark highway, its engine humming softly as most passengers drifted into sleep. I sat by the window, staring at my reflection in the glass, barely recognizing the woman looking back. I replayed every memory I could think of, every laugh, every joke, every moment I brushed off because I wanted to belong. One memory surfaced more clearly than the others. Daniel's father sitting at the dinner table months ago, swirling a glass of wine between his fingers. Sometimes sacrifices have to be made, he had said casually. Everyone laughed back then. Now the words felt like a warning I had missed. By the time the bus pulled into Boise just after sunrise, exhaustion weighed heavily on my body, but fear kept my mind sharp. Cold morning air hit my face as I stepped onto unfamiliar pavement, clutching my small suitcase like it contained everything left of my life. No one here knew me. No one here knew what had happened. For the first time since the airport, I felt the smallest flicker of relief. That relief lasted exactly 3 days. On the third morning, the motel receptionist knocked on my door and handed me a sealed envelope with my name printed neatly across the front. No return address. No explanation. Just official-looking paper that felt heavier than it should have. My fingers trembled as I tore it open and unfolded the document inside. Legal notice. Cold. Formal language filled the page. I scanned the lines quickly, my pulse pounding louder with every word. Then I saw the names listed under associated parties. Daniel Brooks, Margaret Brooks, and beneath them, Brooks Financial Holdings. My breath caught as the truth settled heavily into my chest. This wasn't just about humiliation. This wasn't just about betrayal. This was business. And somehow, I had been turned into the sacrifice. 10 years later, I stood in the center of my office, sunlight pouring through the tall windows and stretching across the polished floor like something warm and alive. The framed certificate on the wall behind my desk still felt unreal to me some mornings. Even after all this time, Lauren Hayes, certified financial recovery consultant, the woman who once sat alone in an airport with nothing but fear in her hands, now spent her days helping strangers crawl out from beneath debt that threatened to swallow them whole. It hadn't happened overnight. Nothing about my life after Boise had been easy. There were years when I slept 4 hours a night, juggling bookkeeping jobs during the day and studying financial law at night. I still remembered the weight of textbooks in my lap while I fought to stay awake, whispering formulas and legal definitions under flickering kitchen lights. The day I passed my certification exam, I cried in the parking lot outside the testing center, gripping the printed results in shaking hands. Not from sadness, from disbelief. For the first time in years, I felt like my future belonged to me again. By the time I opened my own consulting office in Salt Lake City, the fear that once followed me everywhere had softened into something quieter. Caution. Not panic. I hadn't heard Daniel's name in years. Not from creditors. Not from strangers. Not even from my own thoughts most days. Still, old habits never fully disappeared. Every few months, I checked my credit report late at night, just to make sure nothing strange had appeared again. Even after a decade, trust didn't come easily anymore. That morning started like any other. Coffee steaming beside my keyboard, email inbox filling faster than I could clear it. A new case file sat neatly on my desk, labeled with bold lettering from my receptionist. Corporate client, urgent restructuring case. They requested you personally, she had said earlier, her voice curious. That detail stayed with me longer than it should have. I opened the folder slowly, scanning the first few pages without thinking too much about it. Company summaries, debt schedules, asset listings, routine work, until I reached the ownership section. My breath stopped halfway through my chest. Brooks Financial Holdings. The letters stared back at me like something pulled straight from a nightmare I thought I had buried years ago. My fingers froze against the edge of the paper. The room around me suddenly too quiet. For a long moment, I didn't move. 10 years ago, I would have run, packed a bag, changed cities, disappeared again. But standing there in that office, my office, I felt something different settle inside me. Strength. I closed the folder carefully and walked to the window, staring out at the busy street below. Cars moved in steady lines, people crossing intersections with purpose. The world hadn't stopped just because my past had suddenly returned. They might not even know I was assigned to their case. That thought stayed with me longer than anything else. Later that evening, as I gathered my things to leave the office, my phone buzzed in my hand. I glanced down casually, expecting another client reminder. Unknown number? I ignored it and slipped the phone into my purse. Seconds later, it rang again. Same number. A quiet unease settled into my chest as I stepped into the elevator. By the time I reached my car, the phone had rung 3 more times. Washington State caller ED. I didn't answer. Not that night. Not while cooking dinner. Not while washing dishes. Not even when the phone lit up again after midnight, vibrating softly against my bedside table. But the next morning, everything changed. I reached for my phone, still half asleep, and squinted at the glowing screen. 29 missed calls, all from the same cluster of names I hadn't seen in over a decade. Daniel Brooks, Margaret Brooks, unknown numbers repeating again and again. My stomach dropped as reality settled heavily into my chest. They had found me. My thumb hovered over the screen as I pressed play on the newest voicemail. Daniel's voice filled the silence of my bedroom, weaker than I remembered, stripped of the careless confidence that once defined him. Lauren, we need your help. No laughter. No mockery. Just desperation. I sat there without moving. The phone still pressed against my ear long after the message ended. For years, I had imagined what it would feel like to hear his voice again. I expected anger, maybe fear. Instead, what I felt was something far quieter. Control. 10 years ago, they had all the power. Now they were calling me. My finger hovered over the screen as Daniel's name flashed again, lighting up the quiet morning around me. For a moment, I simply stared at it, remembering the last time his voice had echoed through my life. Sharp, careless, full of laughter that wasn't meant to be kind. This time, I answered. Hello? There was a long pause on the other end before he spoke. When he finally did, his voice sounded smaller than I remembered, rough around the edges. Lauren, thank you for answering. I didn't reply right away. I waited. We're in serious trouble, he continued. His words careful, measured. Financial trouble. Of course you are. I thought, but I kept my voice steady. What kind of trouble? He exhaled heavily. The company is collapsing. Lawsuits, frozen accounts, creditors everywhere. We don't know what to do. The words landed quietly, but the meaning behind them hit hard. For years, I had imagined them still living comfortably, laughing somewhere far from the damage they left behind. Hearing desperation in his voice felt strange, not satisfying, not cruel, just inevitable. Why are you calling me? I asked. Another pause, longer this time. Because you're the best person we know who understands debt recovery. We saw your firm. We know what you do now. That was when I understood the full circle of it all. The same people who once turned my life into a joke were now asking me to clean up the mess they created. I can schedule an appointment, I said calmly. Through my office, there was hesitation on his side, like he wasn't used to asking permission. Okay, he whispered. The morning they arrived, I watched them through the security monitor in my office. Daniel sat beside his mother in the waiting area, shoulders tense, his posture stiff. Margaret, once always dressed in polished perfection, now looked tired, older than her years. They didn't laugh. They didn't whisper. They just waited. When I stepped into the conference room, Daniel stood abruptly, his eyes widening as he finally faced me after 10 years. Lauren, I didn't answer his name. Instead, I took my seat across from them and opened the folder on the table. I'm Lauren Hayes, I said evenly. Your financial consultant. The silence that followed felt heavier than anything I remembered from the airport years ago. As I reviewed their records, patterns emerged quickly, hidden losses, transferred liabilities, desperate attempts to delay collapse. And there it was, buried deep in the archived transactions. The original loan, the one tied to my name. It hadn't been random. It hadn't been a prank that went too far. It had been strategy. You used my identity to hide your losses, I said quietly. Sliding the document across the table, Daniel lowered his head. Margaret's hands trembled. We didn't think it would end like this, he murmured. For the first time in years, I looked directly at him without fear. Not anger. Either just clarity. I'm willing to help restructure your debts, I said. But under one condition, they both looked up at the same time. You sign a legal statement acknowledging responsibility for the fraudulent transactions, including the loan tied to my name. Daniel stared at the paper in front of him, the weight of it settling heavily in the room. Slowly, his hand reached for the pen. Years ago, someone had forged my signature to trap me. Now, his trembling hand wrote his own name to set me free. When the meeting ended, I stepped outside into the afternoon sunlight, breathing in air that felt lighter than it had in years. Cars passed. People laughed. Life moved forward, and for the first time, I felt fully part of it again. 10 years ago, they laughed while I stood alone, unsure of how to survive. Today, they sat across from me, asking for help, and I chose strength over bitterness. Not revenge through destruction, revenge through survival. And if you've ever been underestimated, if someone once laughed while you were struggling to stand on your own, I want to know your story. Tell me in the comments what you would have done in my place. And if this story reminded you that strength can grow from betrayal, stay with this channel, subscribe, and be part of a place where stories of resilience and justice are never forgotten.